At Rojas High School, everyone knew Maria Lopez was different. Not because she had the kind of beauty that turned heads or because she was the star athlete, but because of the quiet way she carried herself. Her shoes were scuffed, her uniform was always slightly wrinkled, and the weight of something unspoken seemed to hang in the air around her. People whispered, but Maria never said a word in response. She didn't want attention. She just wanted to finish school and leave. But at Rojas, leaving wasn't easy. Maria was used to being an outsider. She lived in different parts of Mexico, never staying long enough to truly belong. And now, in the small town of San Luis, Texas, she felt like a stranger all over again. The school had a strange mix of cultures, and while the Mexican-American students blended seamlessly, Maria, with her thick accent and foreign mannerisms, remained an enigma. On her first day at Rojas High, she was greeted with the usual polite smiles. But behind those smiles were raised eyebrows, and behind those eyebrows, whispers. "Did you hear? She's from Mexico. Yeah, she probably speaks broken English. She's probably one of those kids who doesn't know anything." Maria overheard the comments as she walked down the hallway, clutching her books close. It didn't hurt anymore. After all, she had been hearing things like this for years, but she couldn't help wishing it would stop. The first class she entered was American history, taught by Mrs. Pearson, a woman who'd been at Rojas for longer than Maria had been alive. Mrs. Pearson greeted her with a cool nod, as if she already knew what to expect. Maria's desk was in the back, and she sat quietly, hoping to disappear. "Maria Lopez," Mrs. Pearson said as she went through the attendance, her eyes glancing briefly at the name. "What's your father do?" Maria hesitated. This question always made her uncomfortable. Her father worked for a construction company, but that wasn't the full story. What her classmates didn't know was that her father, Jorge Lopez, had been a highly respected engineer in Mexico, involved in several large government projects. But Maria wasn't ready to share that. Not here, not now. "My father works in construction," she said softly, keeping her head down. A few students chuckled. It wasn't loud, but it was enough for Maria to feel the sting. She glanced up, seeing the mocking smiles from a few boys at the back of the class. "Yeah, right, construction, that's what they all say." Maria didn't say anything. Instead, she looked out the window, trying to ignore the feeling of embarrassment burning through her chest. Lunchtime wasn't any better. She sat at the edge of the cafeteria, eating her food in silence, feeling the weight of stares pressing against her. A group of girls sitting nearby whispered and giggled, casting sidelong glances in her direction. "She says her dad's an engineer. Yeah, right," one of them laughed. "Maybe her dad's just a worker like all the rest." The days stretched on, and the quiet mockery continued. Maria didn't defend herself. She never did. What would be the point? No one here cared about the truth, about who her father really was or what he had accomplished. All that mattered was that she was different, and different wasn't always accepted. Then came the day of the parent-teacher conferences. Maria hadn't even thought about it until the notice came home in her backpack, folded carefully, just like everything else her mother packed for her. Maria had learned not to expect too much from her mother. Her mother was kind and loving, but she wasn't from here. She didn't always know the rules, and she certainly didn't know what Maria was up against every day. That night, as they sat at the small kitchen table, Maria's mother asked, "Maria, do you want me to go to the conference with you tomorrow?" Maria froze. She didn't want her there. She didn't want her father to be involved either, but it was even worse thinking about how they'd judge her mother, how they'd look at her with pity as though she were less than the others because she wasn't from here, because she didn't speak English perfectly. Maria had lived with that shame for so long, and she didn't want her family to be the target of it. But the next morning, to Maria's surprise, her father was there. Jorge Lopez had arrived earlier than expected, having flown in from a project site in Mexico. When he entered the classroom, dressed in a crisp button-up shirt and carrying his work boots, the room fell silent. Maria's eyes widened. She didn't want him there. She had feared it, in fact, but as her father stepped forward, his presence seemed to change everything. Jorge Lopez greeted him first, but her voice faltered as she looked up at him. She could see the shift in the air as her classmates leaned in, eyes widening with realization. Jorge Lopez smiled politely. "I am Maria's father," he said in a thick accent that suddenly didn't seem so foreign. "I am an engineer. I work for a firm that builds bridges and highways in Mexico. But I am also a father who wants the best for his daughter." The class stayed still. The whispers stopped, and for the first time, she could hear the quiet hum of her own breath. Her classmates couldn't hide the shock on their faces. She wasn't lying. As her father continued to speak about his work, about the projects he had managed, Maria's heart swelled with a mix of pride and relief. He wasn't the man they had assumed him to be, and she wasn't the girl they thought she was. For the first time, Maria didn't feel the weight of their judgment. She stood taller. When the conference ended and her father gave her a reassuring smile, Maria couldn't stop the smile that spread across her face. For once, she didn't care if anyone believed her. The truth had spoken for itself. As they walked out, the halls parted, just as they had for Emily Ray at Brookdale High. Maria didn't need their approval anymore. she had her father's respect. And in that moment, that was all that mattered.